Welcome to Quantum Photonics. A groundbreaking discovery has emerged, shedding light on a phenomenon that resonates deeply with our everyday experiences. The curious preference of our brains to learn more effectively from individuals we like rather than those we dislike. This revelation not only captivates our curiosity but also holds paramount importance in understanding memory integration and its implications for our broader societal dynamics. Through meticulous experimentation involving the most mundane of subjects, researchers have uncovered a fundamental truth. Our personal affinities wield significant influence over our cognitive faculties. Indeed, our ability to weave together disparate pieces of information into cohesive narratives, a process known as memory integration, is markedly affected by our emotional rapport with the providers of said information. The experiments reveal a stark contrast in memory retention and inference making based on the affinities of the information provided, transcending the realm of personal preferences to sculpt our perceptions and beliefs. But what relevance does this hold beyond the confines of laboratory setting? Innate biases is shaping our collective narratives, and by unraveling the intricate mechanisms underpinning memory integration, we gain invaluable insights into the dynamics of polarization and knowledge resistance, transcending the superficial confines of social media echo chambers. So, this is the research, a very, very interesting research of our guest speaker, and I would like to introduce him. Marius Boeltzig is had made his bachelor science and of psychology. He finished it at the University of Potsdam in Germany in 2018. He had his master's of psychology at Lund University in Sweden, and after that he had his internship at the University of Granada in Spain and jobs at the University of Hagen in Germany and then at Lund University. He started his PhD in the fall of 2022 at the University of Munster in Germany, and his research interests are in episodic memory, social influences on memory, modification of memories, and collective memory. So, without further ado, I bring to you here our very special guest speaker, Marius Boeltzig. Marius, welcome to Quantum Photonics.
Thank you so much, Cecil, for this kind introduction, and very nice to be here today. Darcel, I haven't figured out, this is my first time ever on Clubhouse, so I haven't figured out how to send hearts, but rest assured, I did dance along in the beginning. So thank you so much for welcoming me here in the Quantum Photonics Club. Yeah, as Cecil mentioned, I will briefly, or today, I will mainly introduce a study that we conducted over the last couple of years. The paper is already out, and Cecil already posted it, so feel free to check it out. It's in psychology, communication psychology. And these are basically behavioral studies. So we used purely behavioral paradigms, meaning we didn't do any brain imaging, but basically through reaction times, through memory performance, we try to tap mechanisms of the brain, and I will talk a little bit about that. If you want to follow along using the slides, then you're welcome to. They're posted there. They're not essential for understanding of the presentation. It's one of these PowerPoint presentations that basically just has some fun little symbols and some colors. So I hope that you will be able to follow even without the slides, but feel free to open them, and I will refer to the slide numbers while I speak. So on the first slide, you can also see my collaborators. So I want to mention them at the very beginning. I conducted the research together with Mikael Johansson and Ines Bramau. They're both at Lund University. And Ines Bramau, she was my supervisor in my master's thesis. And we were also supported by the Swedish Research Council by a grant from them. And let me start by saying what you might or might not think about memory. But a lot of people think that memory is basically a thing that is focused on the past. So that memory is mainly for representing things that have once happened to us and representing them as accurately as possible. And of course, memory does that sometimes. Of course, it is used for us to be able to look back into the past, but that might not be really the main function of memory. Because if you think about that, you wouldn't really need to reminisce about your childhood in order to survive in the nature. So there doesn't really seem to be such a big evolutionary gain from just remembering for the sake of remembering. But instead, memory has a really important function for now and for the future. So basically, by having prior experiences and by learning things, and gathering experiences in different situations, we're able to better navigate in the future. So if I'm in a given situation now, let's say I enter a restaurant, then I can use my memories of previous restaurant visits to be able to know what I do now. Do I wait for somebody to place me? Do I just go to a table? What can I expect to happen next? This is all based on memory. And this navigation of our environment, that seems to be a fundamental function of memory. It's also important for us to keep our identity. So we use previous experiences and previous memories for us to actually be able to shape an identity and to know what we are as a person. And it's also fundamentally social. So this reminiscing function, for example, that I just mentioned, that seems to be quite important for social bonds. So by sharing our memories, we're more likable to other people. We're able to, for example, if you talk to your family and friends, you often, and I don't know if you can identify with that, but you always have this one friend where it's basically impossible to talk about anything else than some past events. So you maybe have this friend from school, and all you can talk about is your old teachers, for example. But basically, with anybody, memories will play some role in your communication. So this is also probably a function of memory. And to be able to do any of that, we cannot just tap one memory at a time, but we always will have to combine several memories to each other. So going back to the restaurant example, you wouldn't probably just use this one restaurant visit that you had last week to be able to predict what will happen next, but instead you will probably use all your restaurant visits from probably your whole life, or at least from the last couple of years. Um, and if you imagine what tomorrow is going to be like, you will also probably piece together a couple of different memories to be able to basically predict and imagine what is going to happen in the future. So we always have to recombine, or quite often have to recombine several memories, and they might be separated by days or by weeks or by even years. They might have to happen in different places, but for some operations, we just need to piece together memories. So instead of thinking about memory as something that works like a warehouse, for example, where you just have like different boxes neatly separated, each of them are closed and just next to each other, you have to probably imagine memory to be much more interactive and a much more dynamic system where each memory can also activate another memory and where they can basically crosstalk. So this might be a way to think about memory. And some of the functions that a flexible use of memory has, and with flexible, I basically mean not just rehearsing one memory, but be able to combine separate memories that you have made at separate times. Some of the functions are on slide 2. So one thing, for example, is for memories to change. That is basically one consequence of this interaction. So if you have an old memory that, for example, you went to this restaurant once and things played out a certain way. Let's say you were placed at a table, but now you go to the same restaurant again, and now suddenly you're not being placed, but you actually have to just go to a table on your own. Then it might happen that through these two different contradictory pieces of information, your old memory changes. So this is one of the consequences of flexibility. You might sometimes lose detail, and you might sometimes lose specificity. Another thing that we can do with flexible memory is learning concepts. So if you learn a new concept, for example, you're building up, even stereotypes work like that. So for example, you're building up a stereotype about a country that you didn't really know anything about before. Then over time, you will slowly learn facts about this country, and you will slowly form an impression of this country. So this is not just one time that you go there or one time that you meet somebody from there, but you will probably piece together different kinds of information to learn a concept. For example, what is, I don't know, the nation of Guatemala? What do you know about that? We can also make maps based on flexible memories. So if you go to a new city, for example, and you spend a couple of days there, then basically you will maybe sometimes have this phenomenon that you go through a street and then you realize, oh, I've been coming the other way around yesterday. And you slowly fill in the map, you slowly recombine things that you've seen to build a map. And these maps, they can be spatial, and things like that are, for example, done with rats. But they can also be, these can be cognitive maps. So these can, for example, be social maps. Who in your class likes who, and who at your work has once, I don't know, shouted at somebody else. So like this kind of social maps, you also make them through several memories. And the last thing that I will talk about today is knowledge. And you can look at slide 3. This is one of the examples for how we can gain new knowledge on using different episodes. And that's just one of the mechanisms, and that's a very basic one, but this is the one that we use for our studies. And this is called associative inference. And in associative inference, the idea is that you have one episode, and I should maybe clarify that a little bit. With episode, I usually mean like an event that leaves some kind of memory trace. So an episode would, for example, be breakfast this morning. That would be a memory episode because it's some kind of event that I somehow have stored in memory. So in the first episode, you would encounter two different objects. Let's just call them A and B. And then later, however long later, maybe a few days later, you will encounter B, but now with C. And based on that, you can quite easily infer, and that seems quite straightforward, I think, that A and C somehow have a connection, because A is connected to B, C is connected to B, so that means that A and C should also be somehow connected. If you look at slide 4, there's an example there. So for example, here in panel A, you can see a dog and with a woman. So a woman is walking a dog in the park. And let's say you notice them, this woman, she looked particular to you because of all her black clothes, so you remember her, and you also remember the dog for some reason. So you remember them those two together as an episode. And in this case, basically, the woman is element A, and the dog is element B. And then a couple of days later, there is an overlapping event, because now you see the same dog, but now with a man. So the dog still is element B, the man is element C. And because you saw both the man, so element C, and the woman, so element A, you saw them both together with the dog, so with element B, you can infer that the man and the woman have some kind of a relationship. They somehow probably know each other. I mean, there are other possibilities. Maybe the man just stole the dog, but even then there might be some kind of connection. So just based on having seen these two people, both with the same dog, you can infer that the two people have something to do with each other. So you basically make the inference, and it's an inference because you never saw them together. So I mean, if you look at it like this, it doesn't maybe seem terribly exciting and seems quite straightforward, but you never saw these two people together, right? You never saw the man and the woman together, but using separate memories, separate experiences, even at different locations, by piecing them together, you can infer this new relationship. And that basically means you have new knowledge. You now know that this man and the woman have something to do with each other. And if you saw them at the dinner party, even though they don't look like the kind of people who go to dinner parties, but if you saw them there, then you might not be surprised that they came together, for example. So I hope it's more or less clear how associative inference works. So basically it's inferring, so making a connection between elements that you never saw together just because they were both associated with another object. And let's slightly switch gears here. I want to introduce a different aspect, which is that memory is quite influenced by social information. Or by the social world in general. We might want to hope that memory is just perfect, and people used to think that actually it's quite incredible now to look back. But in the 60s, for example, it wasn't really clear that memory wasn't super good. So people just thought, well, I encoded like a videotape basically. And whenever I need it, I will just replay the videotape, and that's that. So people had much more trust in memory, and that has changed through experiments a little bit, because there's a lot of different ways how to show that memory isn't very reliable, at least in all cases. And social information also can influence memories. On slide 5, you can see a few examples of groups that have been used. So a social group can be anything, like a football club that you like or any other sports club. The university you go to can be a very strong social QS. The city where you live, or the state where you live, the country where you live. And then also, and that was the one that we used in our study mainly, the politics. So which politics you're affiliated with. Are you rather liberal? Are you rather conservative? Or which party do you vote for example? All of these are social groups. We have a lot of this kind of social groups, so we have a lot of different social identities. And it can differ from situation to situation how important one single social identity is to you. If you're in a football stadium, then probably your football club will be much more important to you at this moment. But if you travel, maybe, then your country of origin is more important to you. So these social groups, they have different kinds of importance in a given situation. And we have seen in previous studies, so a lot of different studies have shown that social groups have influence on memory. So on the bottom you can see these three green symbols. So for example, imagine you learn a word list. You just learn a list of several different words, and then you're supposed to talk to somebody else who also learned the same words, and you're supposed to try to remember all the words that you have studied. And then this person, and that is basically a confidant of the experimenter. So this person has been instructed to do that. This person will introduce a false item. So an item that was never on the original list, but they will say this item was on the list. And then in the end, you as the participant, you once again go back to your own room and you once again write down all the items, all the words that you had on the list. And we see that it's more likely that you will introduce this false item, so that you will accept this false item as one that you have seen originally if it has been brought forward by somebody from your group. So if it's somebody from your group or also somebody you like, somebody you know, then you're more likely to accept false information and to basically alter and transform your memories so that they fit to what this person said. So false information can enter memory. There are a couple of different ones. I just want different effects as well. I just want to mention one in a study where people just had to learn words. They just gave them random words. They just had to memorize them. People were better at doing that after there was an in-group cue compared to after there was an out-group cue. And these cues were completely irrelevant, had nothing to do with the task, but basically by just showing the color green, if you were in the green team, you were better at remembering the word afterwards. So I find that quite astonishing, and I was interested in whether this would also extend to associative inference. So you can see that on slide 6 now, because the basic idea was we have seen that social groups are relevant for memory. So we know that we learn we learn things better from people that we like, from people that we trust, and from people who are part of our group. But this was always tested for discrete events, so single events, just once on a given time, on a given place, just this one single memory. We didn't know whether we would also have in-group advantages in memory flexibility. So we didn't know whether we are also better at recombining separate episodes and separate memories if they came from the in-group. So what we set out to test was we wanted to see whether we were better at doing this associative inference that I just mentioned before, if an in-group person gave us the first information compared to when an out-group member gave us this first information. So basically, on some trials, it was an in-group person who provided this A-B link. So in the example between the woman and the dog. And in other trials, it was an out-group persona who provided this A-B link. So this first association between the woman and the dog. And then we tested participants on these AC inferences. So they had to link this disparate information. So they had to recombine two different memory episodes to make this novel connection between the A and the C. Again, they never saw the A and the C together, and we expected and we predicted, and we wanted to test whether this is true, that people are better at doing so if information comes from the in-group. And that basically, I will talk about implications later, but that basically means, are we better at making new knowledge if this knowledge is based on in-group information? So if somebody from our own in-group or somebody that we like, if they provide information to us, are we better at creating new knowledge based on this information? Yeah, and so I will go to the experimental paradigm that's on slide 7. As the first step, we had to somehow induce a kind of in-group and out-group distinction, and there are a lot of different ways how this has been done before in laboratory studies. If you're interested in that, you can ask me about that later. I can give you some more information. We tested out something a little bit different. So what we did was, in the first step, we gave participants a bunch of faces. So I think they had 8 different faces, and they were just asked to choose 2 faces that they liked and 2 faces that they didn't like. So we just told them, please choose 2 faces for teammates and 2 faces for people who would more like be your opponents. And these were then in-group and out-group personas. And then in the next step, we gave them the faces that they chose. And we also gave them a lot of different attributes. And you can see some examples. They are not complete, but you can see some examples on slide 8. So for example, we asked them, your teammate and your opponents, which hobby would they have? And we gave them some options, and they could, for example, say, well, somebody that I like would rather like gardening as a hobby, and somebody that I don't like would rather do yoga as a hobby, for example. Um, and we had 6 different categories. You can just see 4 here. But the most important one, and the one that we always started with, was politics. So people basically had to say, your in-group, the persons that you like, which political orientation would they have? And they could choose between, I think in this, they actually was strong Democrat, leaning Democrat, independent, strong Republican, or leaning Republican. So they gave their teammates and their opponents a political identity, in addition to eating habits, hobby, what they studied, and some other things. So basically, they constructed these profiles. We use this kind of. I can talk more about that maybe if you have questions about it. But this is how we induce these personas. They also gave a color to each team. So basically, in these trials and when they memorized the material, they could really see, is this my in group or is this my out group? Because first of all, it was a face that they liked or they disliked, and also it was a color that they liked or they disliked. And then this was all loaded with more information about these people that they added themselves. And we had some kind of liking scale to see whether this manipulation actually worked, and it did. And then you can see this on panel B in slide 7. There was the encoding phase, and encoding just means learning. So they were asked to learn a bunch of material. And the trials, so the individual runs, looked pretty much the same as the example that I gave at the beginning. So participants learned A-B associations first. And the A-B associations were between an object. You can see a tray in the example here, so that would be the A. And that is paired with a background scene, this forest, and that would be B. So an association between a tray and the forest. So you can see completely random associations, no real meaning. And this is the idea about episodic memory, that basically you can just combine anything with each other, no matter how much sense it makes. But whatever comes together, you can bind together as well. And crucially, and this is new to this paradigm, so this paradigm has been used before a lot, but what we introduced now is that these associations were introduced either by an in-group persona or by an out-group persona. So in the episode with the forest, you can see this is the in-group persona that the participant chose, for example, and then the one with the traffic, you can see this would be an out-group persona that the person chose. And we told them basically this person is waiting for you in this room or in this place, and they're going to show an object to you. And we also did this, like we timed it a bit so that it looked like presenting. So participants first encoded all these ABs. So they only saw an object with a scene, another object with a scene, another object with a scene, and always presented either by in-group or by out-group persona. And then a little bit later in a different block, so we had all the ABs first, and then in a different block, they studied BC associations. So once again, to just point this out, these are overlapping associations. So they saw the same element B, which is the background scene. So in this first case, the forest. They saw the same element, but now with a different object. So with this little stool. And based on these overlapping associations, they could now make this associative inference. And that would be between the tray and the stool. So the AC inference. They didn't see these objects together, but because they saw them both in the forest, they can infer that those have some kind of relationship. So this is what the task looked like. And then, of course, in the end, after each of these blocks, of these encoding blocks, we tested them on memory. And the first thing was always the inference test. So we gave them one of the objects, and they were supposed to tell us which object is indirectly linked to this object. So in the example on the bottom of slide 7, we would indicate the stool, and they would have to tell us what relates to the stool. Is it the tray or is it the metal? And they should correctly choose the metal, the tray, sorry. We also tested them on source memory, and source memory just means who presented the object to you. So we gave them the faces of all the personas, and we asked them who presented the object to you. And we also tested them on direct associations. I'm not presenting much of the results about that, but we also asked them which object did you see in the forest, for example, and they saw these directly together. So this is not about flexible memory, but just about direct associations. Okay, I hope that the paradigm is clear more or less, the task that we used. And then on slide 10, you can see some information about the different studies that we did. So we did 3 studies in total. There was a pilot study before, but 3 studies that made it into the paper. All the studies were with US American participants. The reason for that, so we did the study, I was in Sweden at the time, so you might wonder why did we not do it in Sweden. There were two reasons. The first one was that we still had the pandemic going on. So we started in 2021, early 2021. So we just couldn't collect data in the lab. So we turned to an online provider that just had much more people in the US than in Sweden. And then also we just wanted to have these group manipulations as clear as possible. And we just thought in Sweden, I don't know how much you know about the political system, but they have lots of different parties. So it's a bit difficult to really find a party that you really dislike and another party that you really like, also because some of these parties are just quite similar to each other. So we thought that maybe in the US, where it's just a binary system, you basically have two big parties, that then we would have clearer group differences. So we chose the US for that. And all the study that worked online. I just saw that in study 3, you don't have a sample size, but it was also 68 people, so 53, 68, 68. And there were two things that we changed between the studies, but I will talk about that a little more in detail in a minute. So let's go to study 1, and you can see the results on slide 11. And you can see in the left, on the graph on the left that says study 1, this is basically the main outcome. So we did see what we expected. We did see that people were better at making inferences when in-group personas presented some of the information compared to when out-group members presented some of the information. So you can see, if you want to look at it in the graph, you can see the panel labeled with AC because these are the two elements that are being recombined. And the blue bar is the in-group, the orange bar is the out-group. And you can see that people were better, so more accurate at making these inferences in the in-group than the out-group. You might say, and I would agree with you, this is not it doesn't look massive. It's not a massive difference. It was a small effect size statistically, and it was significant. And I think given the small manipulation that we had, it was just a phase there. I think it's quite astonishing that you would even find any difference at all. So it was a significant effect. So people were significantly better in the in-group than in the out-group. We saw the same on a different indicator. So we didn't just use accuracy. So this is really how good are people at doing that? How many times do they get it right versus how many times do they get it wrong? But we also saw it on confidence. So people were also more confident at making these associative inferences when the material came from the in-group. And you can also see on the left, the AB associations, those were also significant. So also this direct material was better in the in-group, which makes sense. So this is really material that the in-group presented directly, and this was also better in the in-group than the out-group. So it basically just shows that our paradigm worked because previous research has shown this, and we also now replicated it. So that's the first study. We then switched something around a little bit. So in study 2, we basically changed the number of personas. In study 1, we had 2 personas for each group. So we asked participants to choose 2 in-group personas and 2 out-group personas. And each of these 4 personas presented 1/4 of all the material. And in study 2, we were interested in, does this effect persist when we just have 1 persona for each group? So just 1 in-group persona and 1 out-group persona. The reason why we did that was that in these kind of studies, sometimes it's a bit conflated. Is this a group identity thing or is this just a liking thing? So some studies basically try to induce liking for the people that present material. And in other studies, it's really like a group. Sometimes they even make these groups in the laboratory. So they just assign people to like group green or group blue, like that's a minimal group paradigm. And that also works, but basically there's not a lot of consistency. So we just wanted to check that directly. Does this effect persist when there's just 1 persona? So basically when it's not a group anymore, but when it's just somebody that I like. And by the absence of the asterisks, you can see that that was not the case. We did not see a significant in-group advantage on the inferences, on the ACs. We think that has something to do with our manipulation, of course. So we think that a perception of group seems to be crucial for the effect. So you have to really see these participants, the personas as a group for you to actually have this kind of in-group advantage. There's a different, more technical explanation. I can give that to you if you want to hear it later. But basically, we think that this is because of a missing of the group perception. But it's not ideal to have one study that shows the effect, another study that doesn't show the effect. So we ran a third one. which basically worked like study one. So once again, we had two personas for each group, two in-group personas, two out-group personas. And another thing that we changed, you can also see this on slide 10 if you want to, we did the liking measure slightly differently. So before, we always asked them, we gave them like a statement, like, I would like to get to know this person better, something like that. And participants were asked to indicate who does this rather apply to, the in-group personas or the out-group personas. And they basically had a scale where they can grade their responses. And then you just don't really know, is this in-group liking or out-group disliking? So instead, we used an absolute liking scale on study 3. So they first answered all these questions for just in-group, then they answered all these questions for just out-group. And by that, we could first of all see that people did like their in-group significantly and also did dislike their out-group significantly. And we could also just group advantage on the ACs, so on the inferences that we cared most about, but then also on both of the direct associations, so both on the ABs and on the BCs. And the AC advantage, the AC inference advantage, so the advantage on connecting episodes with each other, we also saw a significant advantage on confidences again. So people were once again more confident that they were right about these associations. Okay, we expected this pattern, but of course there wasn't really a mechanistic explanation that we had yet. And there was something else that I can show you. That's on slide 12 now. I mentioned that we also asked participants for source memory. So we asked them who presented this material to you. So we gave them one of the objects and asked them, was it this, or that persona? And on the right panel that says team on the bottom, you can see quite an interesting effect. So we basically split up these trials for incorrect inferences and correct inferences. So we looked at how good were they at identifying the source persona after having made a correct inference versus after having made an incorrect inference. And you can see that people were significant. So in general, like a general trend in the data was that people were better at source memory in the out group than in the in group. And that wasn't surprising because people do tend to monitor the out group a little more than the in group. So basically, when an out group persona gives you information, you're more likely to remember that. Just because you're maybe more suspicious of the outgroup persona. So the fact that they gave you this information is really important. So we had seen this before. And we find the same pattern after incorrect inferences. So when participants were not able to connect these two episodes with each other, then they had an advantage on the outgroup source memory. So we did not see this pattern on the correct associative inference. And we found that quite interesting because, well, if you monitor your outgroup more, then we should see this effect also after correct inferences, right? So even when you're correct, you should still be able to better remember that it's the outgroup. And our explanation for this pattern basically also gives an explanation for why we think we have these results in general. What we think happens is that in correct inference trials, so on the left of this graph, when participants correctly say A and C are related to each other, that probably means that they had a lot of time at encoding. They probably were able to encode the episodes well. So for some reason, the material was easily connected for them. They could easily make up a story, for example. So encoding was easy to them. And in that case, they have enough time to encode everything, to encode the object with the scene, to also attach the source persona to it. That's all no problem because it's easy enough. In the incorrect trials, on the other hand, so when they are not able to make this associative inference, that probably means the encoding was a bit more difficult. The objects just didn't quite work. Maybe they had to actually look at the object like, what is that even? For some reason, they couldn't just associate that with the scene very well or something like that. So encoding was more difficult. And we think that as soon as encoding is more difficult, there is a sort of prioritization mechanism. So they have to prioritize what they want to encode. And of course, this is not a conscious decision by participants, but we think that this happens automatically because there's just no time to make this conscious decision. And it seems like when there's not enough time, people rather tend to encode the source when it's an outgroup source. So no matter how little time they have, it's important that they know that the outgroup gave this information, because the outgroup isn't very trustworthy. The outgroup, like basically, if you ever use this information again later, you might want to handle it with care. So it's important to basically chip the information saying, yeah, I know this, but this is from the outgroup, so be careful, even when encoding is difficult. So this has absolute priority to know this is unreliable information. In the in-group, on the other hand, it's not so important to remember the source. Because it's an in-group source, you can trust them. You don't need to remember who told you, because the person that told you was trustworthy. And in that case, participants have more time to actually remember the inference, so to actually remember the objects, to encode them well, and the source just comes later. Um, and that's probably why we see this advantage on associative inference, because people rather prioritize material over source in the in-group condition. So the material is more important than remembering who it is from, while in the out-group condition, they might be more prone to remember who it's from because this person is untrustworthy than trying to remember the material itself. You can see that in a little schema on slide 16. Sorry, I'm jumping a bit now, but on 16, I just have a bit of a picture to show that. So in the in-group that is trustworthy, you encode the material better than the source, but in the out-group that is untrustworthy, the source is more important than the material. Okay, just one word about slide 13, and then I'm finishing up in a few minutes. In study 3, as I said, we used the better liking measure. And using that better liking measure, we could also show that there was a correlation. On the x-axis, you can see how much people preferred the in-group over the out-group. And pre-liking means before all of the memory task, and post-liking means after the memory task. Because that shifted a bit, people tended to like everybody a little less after this kind of annoying memory task, which makes sense, which is understandable. So on the x-axis, you have this liking advantage. Who do you prefer, in-group or out-group? And on the y-axis, you can see how much better were participants at in the in-group versus the out-group. So a higher score on the y-axis means that they were much better at connecting information in the in-group condition. And you can see that there's a positive correlation that became significant. So basically, those participants that had stronger in-group preference, so who liked the in-group, the teammates much more than the out-group, these were also the participants who had a stronger score in the memory test, so who were more likely to be flexible with in-group information than with out-group information. And that's quite important because that kind of ties the effect a little more to the liking, which is nice. So on slide 14, you can see a bit of a summary. We do find the hypothesized effect. So we do find that people are better at making associative inferences in the in-group than the out-group. But, and you can see this on slide 15, the condition for that is that we don't only have one in-group member, but at least two. We, of course, don't know how it would be if you have 3 or 5 or 10 or a million in-group members. So it would be nice to test that, for example, with famous people, where we don't even need some kind of group manipulation, but for example, politicians from a party that you like versus politicians from a party that you don't like, because then we can basically have an infinite amount of in-group and out-group members. But in our case, it seemed to rely on a perception of a group. So if just one liked and one disliked individual, it didn't seem to work. And then finally, on slide 17, there are 2 points for application, and I expect that we'll talk about that much more in the discussion. But just 2 implications that this might have, and of course, this is all preliminary. We just conducted these 3 experiments, and there's more to be done. But what we found and what astonished us, remember the material that we had was completely neutral. It was nonsense even. It was just nonsense, combinations between objects and scenes. It meant nothing. But even then, you're better at remembering in-group information, but not only that, because that had been shown before, but you're also better at using the knowledge that you gained in order to make new knowledge. So, and this is this fundamental idea of this associative inference. You use knowledge that you already have to create new knowledge, to create a previously unseen relationship, something that you hadn't encountered, you didn't immediately perceive it, but based on recombining separate memories, you're able to infer this new knowledge and this new relationship. So that means if already the acquisition is biased, then basically if this also gets into this process of emerging knowledge, then the bias will be introduced in this emergent knowledge network. So it's not just a single episode, but it basically seeps into your knowledge. I can talk about that more, how I think this might happen, but But this is basically one point. And that also means that even in basic cognition, so even something as fundamental as memory, or in our case, the flexible use of memory, there are cognitive biases, of course, and there is polarization. Because now this information was neutral, but you are more likely to hear things that you agree with from your in-group. So a party that you agree with, they are more likely to give you information that you agree with, right? And you're more likely to remember it, but then you're also more likely to use this to build new knowledge. So this advantage will seep into the knowledge network, and that might not even be conscious. So this process of associative inference that can be completely unconscious, you might not even notice that you're doing it, um, but even that might be basically even this operation might be a victim of polarization. Oh wait, so I'm finishing up on the last slide. You can see our faces again, and I also added my blue sky. I really would wish that blue sky would become a thing. So if you're there, then please add me. But I also have my Twitter handle, and there's a QR code to download the study, but it's already been posted in the chat. So that's it from the presentation. Thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marius. So, yeah, please check the Blue Sky account. If you are in Blue Sky, please check the Blue Sky account of Marius and follow him there. So, we are now opening the floor to those who would like to ask questions or ask for clarifications. Please raise your hand. We will bring you up on stage. And for those who came in late, I would just like to say a little something about our guest speaker, Marius Boeltzig. He had his bachelor's in psychology at the University of Potsdam in Germany in 2018, master's in psychology at Lund University in Sweden in 2021, and after internship at the University of Granada in Spain and jobs at the University of Hagen and Lund University, he started his PhD in the fall of 2022 at the University of Munster in Germany. His research interests are in episodic memory, social influences on memory, modification of memories, and collective memory. Very interesting. So, yeah, I'd like to again ask anyone who would like to ask questions to come up the stage. Raise your hand. We will bring you here on stage. So, yeah, Marius, I'd like to ask you if there is a follow up study on this.
We are thinking about it right now, so we haven't started it, but there are a few things that we're interested in. So one thing would be basically the borders or the limits of this manipulation. So as I said, we went for these profiles where they really had a lot of different attributes to assign to each persona, and we mainly did that because we wanted participants to really have a chance to like and dislike the personas, so no matter what they're interested in. But it would be interesting to use the minimal group paradigm, so where you basically just assign people to one group or another group, and to maybe also dig a little bit deeper into liking versus social group. I find that quite interesting. But then I think another logical step would be to go away from this neutral material. So instead of having these randomly made up episodes, to instead go for text material. So there is a line of study that uses some kind of text. So they basically have facts that also have the same structure, AB, then BC, and then you can infer AC. And we're thinking of using this kind of material and then maybe also making it political. So we think it would be quite interesting to see how ideology and accepting statements, how that might interact with this process of associative inference. So that might be the next step, we'll see.
Yeah, thank you. So, Bob, would you like to read the comment of Murali and also Kyle here at the room chat before we go further?
Sure thing. Thank you, Cecile. Um, Early socialization during infancy and childhood plays a significant and critical role in guiding one's personal and emotional development. Yes, our subconscious forms the first 18 months after birth.
So, whose comment was that from, Bob?
This is Murali that you mentioned.
All right. Mark, did you get it? If so, can you comment on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So, I mean, this word of subconscious, that's more in a psychoanalytical tradition than in an experimental psychology one. But certainly there is a lot of stuff that happens in the first couple of months. So, for example, early histories of abuse, they will make a difference, and they will even leave a bit of a scar. So there is, for example, some studies that find genetic effects. So basically, there is a kind of biological marker that is being set on the genes, and then they can influence on whether these genes are being read out or not. So they can have significant influence on cell development, and they can be based on, so they can be caused by, for example, early history of abuse. So there are even biological and maybe even irreversible signs of that. So that's surely true, and there's a lot of also animal experiments that use this with these kind of manipulations, for example. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. Bob? Bob, Kyle is here on stage. Did you see Kyle?
Welcome, Kyle. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. Amazing work, Marius. Really, really appreciate it. I actually talked about childhood development in the back channel there. And I was just thinking about our emotional development, and how that would impact how the likability rating that we place on other people. And then also our conceptual development, and our reasoning skills develop from childhood. So I was just kind of curious about that, and what you think about that, and whether or not you've looked into Susan Carey's work about childhood development and conceptualization over the years.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kyle. So what we assumed in this study, and which is often the assumption in experimental psychology studies, which is not good, but that basically is that participants are more or less almost blank pages. So when you look at these cognitive processes, then often it's a bit overlooked how participants basically arrive in the lab. So personality, experiences, and also susceptibility to different material, for example, that is rather ignored. And the idea basically is, well, we have a lot of participants. So if one person maybe is better at reasoning in general, then that's fine, because another person will be a little bit worse at that. So like these kind of differences, we don't necessarily measure them, but just, well, hope that it basically dissipates over people. So we didn't look at that in this study. We didn't have any kind of personality or reasonability questionnaires, for example. But there are some individual differences studies with this general process of associative inference. That's usually being done with students. And they, in the study, they tested students on the ability to make associative inference, and they correlated that, for example, with academic success. And they did see that associative inference capability correlates with academic success. So people who are better at making associative inferences, they're also more successful at school. So this process seems to be relevant for education. But also in this study, they didn't really look at why some people are better at that or worse. I suspect that it's a correlate of general intelligence, and that has a lot of different. I'm not very familiar with this research, but that has a lot of different factors that can influence that, including genetics, including early life experiences, but then also basically, experience through the rest of your life. I hope that answers the question more or less.
Absolutely, yeah. No, thank you very much. I was just curious about the emotional um, the emotional state of the people doing the experiment, whether or not that would um, change any results.
Yeah, that's also a great question. So I don't think that associative inference particularly has been looked at after well, in different emotions. So maybe after stress induction, for example. I don't think that has been done, but in general, stress particularly has quite some interesting effects on memory. So like the jury is still a bit out, but in general, it seems like some central aspects are enhanced when you're stressed. So you basically focus on the central aspects, while maybe the more peripheral aspects are rather forgotten. So stress does change memory. So I suspect that participants in our study who were stressed or who were in a negative mood, that they would be less likely to perform well on this task. The thing is that if they perform worse on the task, they would uniformly perform worse. So disregarding it, like it doesn't matter then whether it's in-group or out-group, probably. But I would expect that they would just generally have a lower performance level, but might still show these in-group, out-group differences. So that certainly might have an impact, and it would be interesting to look at that. There are some studies about associative inference with emotional material, but that is not the state of participants, but rather the state of the material. But it would be interesting to look at that for sure.
Thank you so very much. Great presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. And we have Kevin who just came on stage. Hi, Kevin.
Uh, yeah, hi. Yeah, it's kind of early in the morning, but let's see. Yeah, maybe I'd ask. Yeah, I think Kyle might have took my question. Like I was going to say something like, judges. People are supposed to be unbiased. World leaders, religious leaders, CEOs of different industries. Different social strata. Communist or socialist systems, cultures, different cultures, indigenous types. But beyond that, I think just personally motivation would do it. In a game show, or if you're going to get $1 million, if you're unbiased, you know, those are some of the future studies. I mean, I don't know if they've done studies like that before, but those are my thoughts. I don't know if you have anything for that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So it might certainly be some aspect of motivation. We didn't really check that. We didn't try to counter that. In general, what we do see is that participants are rather motivated in these experiments, also because they know that if they go below a certain performance threshold, they might just be excluded from the sample and they might not even be paid. Or at least that's always the threat. We never did that, obviously, so we always paid them at least a little bit, even if they didn't really do anything. But people are a bit wary about that on this kind of platforms like Prolific, where we studied. So I think they are in general motivated to have high performance in our case. But there was a study, I just read that the other day, where they did a similar thing. It was also about reasoning, a little more explicit than in our study. So they had participants basically do like a reasoning task. And the result of that would either align or not align with their political views. So the result of this reasoning process would either be something they agreed with or disagreed with. And they also found that people were better at evaluating these statements when it aligns with their political views. So they did a follow-up study where they paid participants for each correct answer. So participants were motivated to even disregard their ideology and agree with a statement because it's true, even if they don't agree with it. But that didn't change the patterns. So even paying participants to basically go against their beliefs, that didn't change the pattern. One problem with that study was that the incentive for basically going against your belief was 4 cents. And these were really statements like, all abortion is bad or all abortion is good, something like that. So really statements that might go to the core of people's ideologies. And I don't know if 4 cents are enough to basically go against this kind of core convictions. But yeah, so there are some studies where they try to counter that. We didn't do that. So motivation might certainly play a role. I don't think it might be a big role, but we can't rule that out, of course.
Oh, then I would think of the body, because we have the intellectual. Then what about social shaming? You get shamed by your friends if you do the wrong thing, or you get zapped or poked, or or something like that. Is what I can think of.
Yeah, absolutely as well. I also wouldn't be able to exclude that here. This was, of course, a memory task that was done at the computer of participants in their houses. So I don't think that like a performative aspect would be really big. But as soon as we take it out of the lab, then of course these will be effects that might be observable. And this is why I mentioned I think it would be interesting to actually use material that might be controversial, because then we can really tease out these things as well. Like what happens if you actually, publicly agree with something like that? We don't know that from this experiment, but that would be something very interesting for the future.
yeah, like they put you in stocks. You know, you get put in stocks. You know, and then put in the square, and then I don't know if you've seen one more thing. Like maybe you've seen conservatives and liberals. They had some studies. Conservatives they have the fight and flight reaction more than the liberals, supposedly in the studies. So I don't know if that affects anything.
Um, yeah, so there are a lot of different studies on basically like cognitive correlates of political ideology. Since the material here wasn't threatening in any case, I don't think this would have a big difference. But surely cognitive styles might differ. And one thing that I should maybe say here is that we didn't sample specifically for Democrats or Republicans, so people could just participate regardless of political orientation. We know what they identified with, but we didn't sample them based on that. And we basically saw we also had more Democrats than Republicans in our samples. So if we would really want to look at political identity in isolation, which we didn't do because we had these profiles, but if we really were just interested in political orientation, then this would be something, of course, that we would have to do. And then these cognitive styles that might differ between ends of the political spectrum, they would surely play a role. Yeah. Thanks, Kevin, for these questions.
Yes, so I got a question here sent to me by Marina. So, yeah, she's asking, are there practical implications of this research for educational settings or workplace environments? How might educators and employers leverage this insight to enhance learning and collaboration?
Yeah, I think there are. So we've talked a bit about societal implications now and about politics, for example. But of course, a lot of learning also, well, I mean, the classroom is basically the place where learning happens, or at least in like the early stages of development. And um, if we take our results very seriously, then we would have to say, well, if you don't think your teacher is part of your group, then you're less able to, first of all, remember things that they told you, but then also to connect this with your prior knowledge and to integrate these information in your prior knowledge. Um, the thing is that I mentioned that briefly at the beginning, we always have a lot of, I mean, every person has a lot of different social identities, and different identities might be active at different times. So I think that possibly, and we don't know that, we haven't conducted a study on that, but possibly if you activate a shared identity, so if you stress a commonality between, for example, an educator and students, or for example, also people at work, if you stress this identity, then it might be better. So people might be better able to remember things, but then also grow knowledge out of that. Um, and that would be for companies, for example, that would surely be something. I don't know how much. I mean, since I don't work in a proper company, but a university, it might be a bit different. I think people who identify more with the company and see that in their leader, for example, or in a communicator of information as well. So if there's a shared identity for this company, for example, then this surely will help learning. I'm rather sure about that. So definitely direct learning. So really information retention, but then as our results suggest, this probably will also help you in making inferences and in growing new knowledge. And that would be the ideal outcome of education, right? That you don't only basically like slavishly learn facts and learn these things that you're being told, but that you can also flexibly use this knowledge and make new knowledge out of it. So yeah, I think this might be a practical implication. Let's see, maybe we'll look at that in the future, but I think this would be something that our results would suggest. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Marius. So that reminds me, there is a general saying that, in order to have a mentor to be excellent, you don't need the mentor to be super brilliant, but maybe just okay. And as long as, the mentor has a lot of empathy and is willing to listen to the mentee. So it's very important for learning. But in my case, for instance, when you say that you learn from people that you like most, of course, yeah, that's great. But in terms of education, some of the professors that I had before were, very terror professors, and they put you like through the stages wherein they give you, a lot of difficulty, and later on they will show appreciation. So I think I learned a lot from professors who torture you. Maybe I'm a masochist, and they give you a hard time in order to pass the milestones that they made. So yeah, I learned a lot from these people. Like in the old days, when you go to schools which have the traditional types of professor, now times have changed, of course. So, but in my case, I learned a lot from this, and I get very good grades, and other people fail. So, yeah, that is my experience. On the other hand, now, because I am very much involved with our alumni association in my university, and I still reach out to the students there, the residents, the people that I have mentored, because I really care for them. They usually turn out to be very excellent. So yeah, I think this is just an anecdotal experience, but I would like to share this. And then I see, anyway, Dash, who just came out on stage, but I got a question from Robert. So after the question, I will give the mic to Das. So Robert N. Asked, what implication do these findings have for understanding the spread of biased information within social networks, particularly in the age of online media and information sharing?
Yeah, I think there are definitely implications. We because now we have a situation where it's very easy to only be exposed to information from your own group. That wasn't the case, right? That wasn't the case before. So before that, even if you strongly identified as let's take the US as a Democrat or Republican, you had to watch news that were more or less neutral. I mean, I don't know about the US in like the 60s and whether that was really the case, but at least I know for Germany that certainly during the time when there was newspapers, news were not partisan. Maybe there was affiliation, but at least it was relatively neutral. Um, so that means that the information that you got was not motivated. And now it's very possible to just basically get your news from interested people, so from people that already have a standpoint. And I mean, social media is tailored to feed us this kind of information. So that means this kind of bias information that already aligns with your viewpoint that will enter the system, and this bias information will then be used to create new knowledge. So that means it spreads out. So I think this is probably the worrying thing about that mechanism that we find. Again, since it also happens automatically, we don't necessarily need to tell people that they should make these inferences, but it just happens automatically. And yeah, I think that the scope is definitely increased now compared to maybe 50 years ago. Yeah.
Thank you, Marius. So I'd like to give the mic to Dash now. Dash, welcome on stage.
Good morning. Um, so I actually just have one. So first, uh, Professor Marius, this is a phenomenal paper, phenomenal lecture. Thank you. I just have one question. Does does this also you know um, when we're in the presence of people that we like, as far as like learning goes, does that also mean that we learn faster as well as we learn more? Like we're able to learn more, or is it just we're able to learn more and not necessarily more efficiently?
Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Dash. That's a very good question. We measured reaction times in our study. So we measured how fast they were able to respond to our prompt, so where they had to make this connection between these two elements. We didn't see a difference there. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't learn faster, because the learning obviously took place before. So the learning already took place while they first saw these objects, and not really just when they had to retrieve it. I am not aware of studies that looked at the speed aspect, because often in these studies, yeah, but that's very interesting. Actually, I should look into that, because often these studies are set up in a way where you're presented with material. So let's say just a word list, and each word is displayed for, let's say, 2 seconds, but at least for a fixed amount of seconds. Um, And the idea is that, first of all, you can control how much exposure participants had to this material. So you know it's exactly 2 seconds for each word. And also each participant had the same amount of time for each word. So this is just a way of controlling the encoding situation, so that then you know that any kind of differences that you found were not because they had a different amount of time for the encoding. So I'm not actually sure whether there's any kind of, I mean, I'm sure there's self-paced studies, but I wouldn't actually know about them in the context of in-group, out-group manipulations. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you an answer on that, but it's certainly very interesting. It's a good question.
Oh, good man. Thank you for your response. I'm actually looking forward to that research in the future from you if you do decide to go into that. And I say that to say because I'm actually pulling from a personal experience that I've been having as of recently. There's a Starbucks that I frequent, and I remember being in like high school taking Spanish classes, and I was not engaged. I did not learn. I don't think I learned anything in high school in Spanish. But as I've been frequenting this Starbucks, um, there's a few um, of the baristas there who are Hispanic that I really enjoy being around. Just really enjoy talking to these people, and I've been, taking the initiative to actually start learning Spanish when I would visit this particular Starbucks. And it feels like I've been learning Spanish faster than I was when I was in high school. So that's what prompted my question.
Yeah, I mean that's lovely. Like Starbucks is an arena for education, so that's very nice. And certainly, I think this is maybe also a question of motivation, right? So where you're just more motivated because you have a good role model, for example. I'm not sure if that helps you to learn vocabulary faster in the moment. So that would be an interesting question. But I think if you mean with faster, like the overall progress over months or years, then I probably would say yes, you're also being faster because you're just being better. So if you're better at learning this first information, you can go on to the next one, then you will also be faster in the long run of things. What I just don't know is that whether this also applies to just like small scale, how fast am I able to learn this word, for example? How much time do I need to commit this word to memory? So I think this is not the type of experiments that would have been done. But if you have a grand curriculum and you just need to learn all of them, then I think yes, you would be faster if it's from somebody you like or share a group with.
Got you. Thank you so much, Mario.
Thank you and good luck with the Spanish.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dash. I would just like to share something also about my experience and some observations that we have about gifted children, for instance. I would just like to mention this because basically it relates to the topic that we say, why do we learn from people that we like? So, in terms of the educational setting, you would see people who are too far too advanced than their peers not listen to the teachers anymore, maybe even if they like them because they learned it a long time ago. And I would like to talk about this from the referential point of view about the difficulty level that is no longer challenging for them. So yeah, they learned that in the past, and basically the curriculum has nothing to learn from them if the curriculum will strictly stick to what they prescribe for that particular year. So, in general, you would see a lot of profoundly gifted or highly gifted people who drop out of school or who underachieve because the material is no longer challenging to them. And as I said, I'd like to build this up on the context of how people learn. So, yeah, even for instance, if they like the person who is mentoring them, but if the materials or what is being prescribed for them are not too easy, then they are greatly discouraged to continue on learning. Just like we would see that a lot of people who have achieved, like even, I'm sorry to say, I mean, very sad about the passing of Peter Higgs. But you would see that he was not liked by many people because maybe they could not understand him. And just like Einstein also, when he was developing as well, many people will not understand him, not even the mentors. Of course, Einstein is just an example, but there are many outstanding people who had a great difficulty in this traditional style of learning, and in which the case of mentor-mentee relationship probably does not apply. Would you like to comment on this?
I absolutely agree with you. And so just to say, in our study, we of course didn't, like, these are all just so complex factors that we couldn't really control for, that we didn't even look at. We would assume in this case, for example, there was no prior knowledge about these episodes because they're randomly combined, right? There was no, like, there was no prior knowledge that could have helped, except for this very basic world knowledge that everybody has. So we don't really know how that interacts with that. But sure, like the role of the educator is very important, but then also the role of the students in situations like these. And one thing that relates to what I mentioned before, the study that looked at differences in associative inference and how that relates to education. And I mean, so being good at associative inference sometimes means that you don't need to be told, right? So you made a connection between things without ever having been told, just because you're able to recombine episodes with each other. So you're inferring the knowledge, and other people might actually need to be fed the knowledge. They need to be told. And this is also a mechanism how differences can arise in the classroom, and why it might be frustrating for just more intelligent students, because something that might be obvious to them because they are so good at recombining old knowledge has to be actually spelled out for other students. So that might be a mechanism that plays a role there. And actually, Cecil, if I may still comment on what you said earlier about the like high pressure professors that you learned a lot from. I absolutely agree, and that is not explainable by our findings. So I should probably point out, this is just one mechanism how you learn, right? So learning better from people you like is just one trend there is. There are other trends, and they might overlap. They might be relevant in different situations. But learning from stress, for example, that is also a mechanism that is relevant. So like a certain amount of stress can be beneficial for learning. It's usually not beneficial for health, but it can be beneficial for learning in the short term at least. So this is another way how you can learn. So that probably has some merit, some educational one, even though it's not good for health. Um, but then also the role of competence of the educator, that is another factor that can also intervene with that. So I think students are quite finely tuned to how good the educators are and how much they know about the topic. And I, as a student, found nothing more annoying than when you know your teacher doesn't have the answer, but just evades the question and just tries to save face for some reason. And that's something that I just really appreciate always at university environments, that you can just say I have no idea, and that you can just say I don't know. But anyway, this is also anecdotal. But the role of perceived competence and perceived warmth, for example, as well, that also plays a role. So the findings that we have, which is in-group, out-group advantages, or liking, disliking, that is one thing, but there are a lot of other trends that also play a role in naturalistic settings.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. A very, very interesting study indeed. And it tries to bring us and makes us think a lot of questions. And I hope, that there will be a further study because this is very important. So I think there was a question also here earlier about the ethics of trying to use this study, for instance. Um, how do biases in memory integration contribute to the formation and perpetuation of stereotypes and prejudices within the society? So, yeah, I think I saw someone who asked that question a while ago. So, any comments on this?
Yeah, definitely, and I think for the same mechanism that I mentioned before, like the way that political information can seep into, or politically biased information can seep into your knowledge network. The same is true about knowledge about groups, or pseudo knowledge about groups and stereotypes. And I mentioned that briefly at the beginning. A similar mechanism is also being used for concept learning. So also to learn a new concept, you have to generalize over a lot of different episodes. And that can also be biased, surely. That can also be prejudiced. So if you build up a new concept, let's say there's a new nationality that you know nothing about. You just found out that the nation of Finland exists, for example, and then you will slowly gather knowledge about them. And if you listen to if there's a Swede, for example, who tells you something very rude about the Finnish, which they often like to do, and you like the Swedes or you like this particular person for some reason, then you're probably more likely to take this as a more important chunk of your knowledge that emerges. While maybe there's somebody else who might tell you something nice about the Finns that you rather disregard because this person happens to be supporting a football club that you don't like. So we haven't seen this for concept formation yet. So this is just speculative. But surely the role of the person, of the source, will also play a role in concept formation, and that probably also means in the role of building up prejudices, and stereotypes.
Yeah, thank you, Marius. So your study also reminds me of irrational behavior, and also the book of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, and yeah, A Guide to the Irrational Behavior, and the other books by Dan Ariely. Of course, some of them had been invalidated as of now. There has been a controversy about the studies that he presented. But I would just like to comment that, just like what Kevin said a while ago, there is also the role of yeah, giving economic rewards and other kinds of rewards in order to sway or influence decision, or for people to stick to the field of the biases that they have. So yeah, I think it's also a good reference to try to delve deeper into the study that you have. Yeah, would you like to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, it's an interesting book to read anyway. And I think the fact that our group manipulation even worked shows how embedded these biases can be. In our case, I wouldn't think this is really a reasoning bias, but it probably seems to be happening because people are just better at remembering information from the in-group. So it already seems to be happening at encoding. But there is no real reason not to listen to your in-group, sorry, not to listen to your out-group, but to only listen to your in-group. Because this is information that is completely random. We provided it. You know you will be tested on all the information. So you have like everything, it would just be rational to listen to both. And probably they do listen to both, but still there was this small effect of just being able to remember better things that are from the in-group. So I think that is incredibly interesting because also the personas mean nothing, right? Like these are not people that exist. They made them up, like themselves even. We didn't even pretend like these are personas that you can meet now and this is information about them. They made them up. They chose the attributes, they chose the faces. So the personas have no value, the material has no value, and still we find the effect. So I think this is quite interesting and shows like just any kind of categorization, how easily our brain responds to that and how easily we feel part of that. I can maybe mention this minimal group paradigm a little bit more that I mentioned before. So in these paradigms, people come to the lab and they're basically sometimes they're given like a small test. Maybe they have to choose between two paintings, for example. Like they're given two paintings and they have to say which one do you like more, and they just say this one or that one. And then the decision is completely irrelevant. Of course, the participants don't know that, but because of their choice of painting, they're then being told, okay, so you are a person who does more bottom up cognitive processing, or you're a person that does more top down cognitive processing. Or they, for example, maybe not do the processing thing, but they will say, okay, so that means you're in the green group, or that means you're in the blue group. These groups mean nothing. They never meet anybody else from the group, from the alleged group. It's just them. They're just being told that they're in this group. And even then, if you show them, for example, the green color, which they are part of, versus the blue color that they're not part of, they will remember the information better that follows the green color. The groups have no influence. They never met anybody else from the group. It means nothing, but still, by just being put into a group, they will already have different memory biases. And they will also have more empathy. In other studies, they, for example, gave participants electroshocks, not participants, but confidants of like actors, basically. They gave them electroshocks, and the participants observed that. And this person is either part of your own group or part of the other group. And once again, minimal groups. So this person is also in the green group, like you, or this person's in the blue group while you're in the green group. And there's more reported empathy with people who are in your own group. So yeah, so we're very susceptible for this kind of group mechanisms, and it's rather difficult to break them up again. So I think these group dynamics are really quite interesting, and I think like my fascination with that is the reason why I wanted to do the study, because I just find it fascinating how much cognition is dictated by by the groups that we're part of and the identities that we share. And then if even something so basic is already influenced by that, then it's really, really hard to imagine like how, if you think that basically everything is stacked against your candidate, for example, how are you supposed to get out of that? And it's very, very difficult to overcome this kind of biases. I think I'm not saying it's impossible. Our research doesn't really provide a way how to do that. We basically just found a problem, but we might be able to do that in the future, how to overcome that. And I think stressing shared identities, that might be something that does the trick. So even if your candidate is from a different, if a candidate is from a different from a different party, they might still be part of your country. And if that is sufficiently important to you, then just stressing this commonality might be helpful for overcoming some of these biases. Again, speculative, but yeah, these are my thoughts about that. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I was just reminded of one of our guest speakers here, Emily Kaspar. I think it was a year and a half ago. She comes from University of Edinburgh. Her study was like duplicating a little bit the Milgram experiment, and even up to this day, of course, they did not totally try to replicate it, but some of the questions there they were trying to address further and check, how it fares with a milder implementation of the experiment. And they were shocked as to how stress or groupthink would be able to affect a decision of a person when placed in a certain kind of situation. So, yeah. Uh, so we have Luca, who just came on stage, and I'd like to welcome Luca. Luca, welcome on stage.
Hi, Cecile, and hello, Marius and Bob. Cecile, congratulations on the room. This is a very interesting topic, and what a success to bring these researchers to our space. So thank you. I had a question for you, Marius, sort of based on what you were saying, looking at in group and out group, the dynamic and ultimately the bias towards liking or not liking a different color. Since there's so much research um, on the predisposition of individuals towards a group, I'm wondering if if how you're thinking around a general model of individual towards group, in group and out group behavior has evolved, has changed, what questions you sort of have, what research questions you have about the model. I mean, one of the things I was wondering was if it's almost as if um, individuals have are kind of group tropic. We're always looking for the group to belong to, and we'll look for sort of any ways to make that movement, and our brains are kind of set up that way. And so, yes, all the biases flow from that, but that the model towards, I don't know, group tropism or, and this isn't sort of my field, but I was just curious on your thoughts about the more general thoughts about the model of this paradigm. And thank you very much for coming to Clubhouse. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Luca. So I there are a lot of explanations for why we might be so prone to seek groups in that way. And I mean, you can certainly try to explain it through evolution. Those of us who are more capable of living in a group, those of us who are more attached to a group and affiliated to a group, these people were also more likely to just survive in adverse circumstances, because I guess like in early times it was just very difficult to survive on your own. So being able to be and group identification and feeling part of a group, that also helps you to stick around there, and that helps you to overcome challenges as well, because if you have a kind of commitment to the group, then you're also more likely to help. You're also less likely to just leave when there's a conflict. So I think there's an evolutionary advantage in that. And then some people don't really like these evolutionary explanations, and I understand why. But a different way of looking at that is probably how our world is set up. We are, as children, constantly surrounded by people, and even as adults, almost constantly surrounded by people. And basically, the world that we're born in is so full of different groups and so full of different identities. I mean, even like there's when you grow up, some fathers or sometimes also mothers, I guess, have a very strong idea of what football club you're supposed to support in Germany, at least, and maybe it's baseball or basketball or whatever in the States. So these kind of groups are almost like a thing that you inherit, and people are constantly being divided in groups as well. And even gender already, like you make two groups in a school and you say, well, boys to the left and girls to the right, for example. So I think that groups are just really, really omnipresent in our world, and then it makes sense for us to think in these kind of categories. And I can't really tell you which one it is. I don't think there's a universal explanation for that. But at least it seems to be very pervasive, and this is probably what we find in our experiment.
Yes, so Marius, so we were, I know that we've been here for 1 hour and 40 minutes, but I just have one comment because earlier we also spoke about cognition and the development of cognition. And maybe 2 or 3 days ago, there was a paper which appeared, which was published about the Molyneux question. This paper addresses this question. The Molyneux problem concerns the possibility that a person born blind might immediately identify a shape previously familiar to them only by touch if they were made to see. So, through personal correspondence of Molyneux and John Locke, Locke interposed a question in his essay concerning human understanding. So he phrased it like this: suppose a man born blind and now an adult and taught by his touch to distinguish between a cube and a sphere of the same metal and nearly of the same bigness, so as to tell when he felt one to the other which is the cube and which is the sphere. Suppose that the cube and the sphere be placed on a table and the blind man to be made to see. So is will the blind man, by his sight, before he touched them, he could now distinguish and tell which is the globe and which is the cube, meaning to say, if someone who can only feel things by touch, if he's able to see immediately, will he be able to recognize it? And so there was an experiment which was done and was published in the Royal Society. um, so if a congenitally blind person learns to distinguish between a cube and a sphere by touch, would they immediately recognize these objects by sight? So they tried to do this experiment on chicks, wherein they put them on, when they were born, they were in a very dark place, and then they tried to conduct associative memory on the chicks, trying to use surfaces which are smooth and rough. And immediately after that, they tried to subject them to light also, so that they are able to see. And the chicks immediately were able to distinguish which one is are rough surfaces and which one are smooth surfaces by sight. So I would just like to point this out because generally, when we speak about artificial intelligence or people talk about AGI, we say that, of course, there is a black box and they still don't have the they don't have a common sense which is present among humans, and because basically our memories are also conditioned by our association with the subjects, and also probably some people will say it's because also of our epigenetics when we evolved. So I would just like to mention this because you talked about some things in cognition that is related to the topic that you have. So, any comment on this?
I know it definitely sounds fascinating. And I was just thinking how nice it is to be able to think about science and read science, because that's a really cool idea to try to do with animals and find out more about that. Just one association that I had. So this mapping that you have from one sense to another, for example, that just reminded me on how little we basically know how other people's memories look like, and I find that quite fascinating. So even though we might be able to talk about a memory and share it with other people, and we might find convergence, be like, yes, I remember that too. How it looks in somebody else's brain, you have absolutely no idea, and what they imagine, like visually, we will just never be able to know. And I think that's quite interesting. I There are some people, for example, who just cannot imagine images. So if they're asked to imagine a chair, for example, they don't conjure up an image of a chair like visually. They can think about the concept of chair, but they just cannot conjure up an image. And there's not that few people who have that. But it wasn't really discovered until like recently, like a couple of decades ago, because well, you don't really talk about that, and you just don't really know. So this correspondence of what people talk about and what they actually see in their brain, that can be quite tricky to trace. So that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. So I have actually also interviewed, just because of curiosity, it's not a study, people with synesthesia, and people who are like very, very smart in numbers. And I would ask these people, for example, who are quite smart in math, and yeah, how did you experience, for instance, looking at shapes when you were small? Because I had an experience about a study on a potentially gifted person. When she was 6 months old, she could assemble a puzzle, 250-piece puzzle. No one taught her how to do that, and then she turned it upside down already because the ones with the picture does not make sense. And so I interviewed another person who is exceptional in terms of mathematics, and I said, when you were small, how did you perceive, shapes? Because he was finally a top notcher in architectural board exam, and then he became a lawyer. He was also a top notcher. So I asked him, how did you perceive, these shapes or architecture when you were small? And he was describing it to me, and I said, not everybody perceives it that way. So yeah, but for them in general, you would say that it's just like breathing, and you did not even think that other people have a different perception of that, maybe until you become grown up. So it's really fascinating, just like what you said, at how each of us is able to perceive. So probably, since maybe we have tools in the future, it's time to look at how people perceive on a personalized level.
Yeah, surely. And there are some tools that approach that. So, for example, you can now look at brain activation when people see images, for example, and compare this brain activation to somebody else. While you see the same picture, and you can see like commonalities of that. But of course, there's always just a small overlap in how the brain responds to stimuli. And there's a lot of other things happening, obviously. So this doesn't really help us to, like really be able to see what other people see yet. But yeah, we're approaching that. At least we can see how the brain responds on a broader level to stimuli.
Yeah, thank you. So we've been here for about 1 hour and 46 minutes, and I would like to ask Marius as to what time does he have for us? Still have for us?
Yeah, it's getting a little bit tight. I have theater tickets for later actually. But we can take a last question maybe. That would be good.
Yes. So Marius, there's Kevin. Did you flash your mic, Kevin?
Oh
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just a
Oh
minute.
yes.
I just like to say that we will give the mic to Kevin, and I'd like Bob to read the comment of Kyle on the room chat later after Kevin. So, Kevin, mic to you.
Okay, yeah. I thought of one more thing. Perhaps like adrenaline. Cecile had a guest on. Where you get mad at the situation and you do better. At least for college students in the study, and so if you throw some adrenaline in there, maybe that could be uh, another aspect. And then like or during the situation, you say, okay, we're changing it up now. Now you get $100 for an unbiased decision. So you kind of throw a wrench. Maybe they're not expecting it. Like a lightning round in the game show. Maybe in even aspects like your family, your childhood friends. Are right physically next to you. Stuff like that, like the Hunger Games or a Gladiator. So just some ideas there.
Yeah, not something we can do in a study, of course. Impossible. I mean, I don't know. This might be able to overcome some part of it, at least the motivational aspects. But I would believe that this kind of biases that we found in our study as well, they're not entirely motivational. Some of them certainly are, but I would say that there's a big proportion as well of things that just happen automatically because the processes are just too fast. And in our case, people were just too motivated, or probably in some cases at least, people are just too motivated to do well for that to have such a big effect. But yeah, I mean, motivation can play a role for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, and yeah, thank you, Marius. So, Bob, would you like to speak? Otherwise, maybe because Marius has to go soon, we will give the mic soon to Darcel to he'll help us do the countdown to close the room. So, Bob, if you'd like to.
I would like to say that this was a fascinating discussion, and I'm carrying away a bunch of things to think about, and that makes a great day for me. Thank you, sir.
Lovely, thank you, Bob. That's very good to hear. Thank you.
Yes, so I don't know if you can hear me. So, but Kyle Kuhl said conceptual metaphor theory. He was just speaking about this, so maybe check it out. He was talking about this originating in the field of cognitive linguistics and embodied simulation theory. So, yeah, it's great to listen to and also discuss with Marius. Thank you so much for being with us here, Marius, and we hope that we can invite you here again in Quantum Photonics for another presentation and fireside chat. And yeah, before I give the mic to you to give a parting shot to us, I'd like to tell everyone that in about 8 hours from now, we will be having another room. We have a guest speaker from University of Toronto. Her studies about X actually. Of course, it's generally about social media, but the coverage of her study was about X, Twitter, and how does it affect us? How our interactions in Twitter and social media affecting us? Does it contribute to the depression that a lot of people are saying? How does, in fact, it affect our everyday lives? So please be with us for an interesting discussion and also to listen to our guest speaker. It is in our platform. Please check that out. So, Marius, I'd like to give the mic to you to say if you have some last message or any comment before we give the mic to Darcel.
Yeah, so this was fascinating. Thank you so much for all your good questions, and just it's always good to hear questions like that because if you do a research, you have a lot of very very small problems, right? And you're into like a lot of details and like a lot of tiny mechanics of the study you're trying to design. Those really preoccupy you, and you somehow sometimes lose a little bit of sight of what it means for implications. So it's really interesting to take that away from today. What kind of other factors can modulate the effect? So what other factors can actually have an impact on how much this effect can be seen in participants? And it's also always nice to see, basically to think about once again about the implication that this research has. And of course, this was the first study that we did in this field, but we know a lot about at least general in-group advantages memory. But I hope that we can extend that. And yes, Cecile, I'm very happy to come back if that happens and to present here again. So thanks so much for listening to me and for all the good questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marius. So, as you give your parting shot, you could say that the study looks simple, but actually its implications are really, really wide range. And it made me think also about leadership, how people will be influencing other people through leadership. And there was a saying about the writer of the Little Prince, he was saying, if you want to really try to make a good society and also lead people, don't just give them like food or water, but also teach them how to be passionate to work towards a certain goal. So yeah, I think it's also very important in relation to this. So thank you so much for giving us, making us ask questions, giving us good insights, and trying to start this study. We pray and we hope, you know, that it will move further to the next levels because it's very, very helpful. So thank you once again, and I'd like to give the mic to Darcel now to help us close the room.
Thank you, Cecile, and thank you, Doctor. I echo both Bob and Cecile's words. To close the room, we're going to start our countdown from lucky number 7. Is everybody ready?
Ready?
Yeah.
Well,
7,
Seven,
7.
Kyle 6,
six,
Dash 5,
Five,
Kevin 4,
cuatro.
no 4,
quattro.
Uh,
Bob 3,
I got a red line. 4-3.
3 it is.
Cecile Dos Anges.
Two.
Good doctor, you're numero uno. Call out our last number, please.
1.
Yeah, thank you, Marius. Thank you so much. Please come back to Quantum Photonics and to everyone. See you in the next room coming soon in 8 hours. Bye.